Hello, so welcome to what is undoubtedly a sort of a different style video for the channel. Today I'm kind of just sitting down for a sort of one-on-one or kind of one-on-camera discussion, I suppose, with you, the viewer, to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, I suppose. It's not very much down the political sphere, but I hope even if you're subscribed to that channel for that content, you still get something out of this anyways. I think we can all undoubtedly say that 2020 was a pretty tragic year, in all honesty. COVID-19 will undoubtedly be remembered as the vaccine that brought the world to a standstill at one point or another for a lot of us, and most of us spent more time indoors than we did outdoors. And as someone who, revels in meeting with friends on a weekly and sometimes on a daily basis and, using things like the cinema or other amenities that were closed due to the virus, it's no surprise that I turned to a medium that was very much untouched by the virus. Games have been a big part of my life for a number of years now. I remember fondly, being obsessed with video games from a very early age. So it was no surprise that at a time when everything seemed like it was going to flip upside down, well, which it did, that I went for something familiar, something that, really drove close to home and reminded me of better times. So with that being said, I kind of want to touch on briefly 5 games specifically that I think impacted my 2020 the most, whether it be through their evocative storytelling, their phenomenal gameplay that got me hooked, the memories that had resurfaced through my history with said game, or even just new memories that were created when we were stuck in lockdown and we had to pretty much communicate all through the internet. I don't intend for there to be major spoilers in this video, but if you are someone who's even just a little bit weary of, minor spoilers for games and you want to check them out first, there'll be a timestamp below. You can figure out which games either you have played and want to skip to hear my thoughts on, or you haven't played and you want to go and play them and then come back to this video. So it's all up to you. I'd highly recommend playing all the games I'm about to mention. Obviously, I wouldn't be saying they're in my top 5 games for this year otherwise. Before Ireland went into lockdown, or even before anyone was really starting to take notice of COVID-19 in Ireland, I dedicated a few days to what is, described as one of the most renowned story-driven FPS shooters of the last 20 years. Having been released in 2007, Bioshock drops you into the world of Rapture, which is this sort of underground paradise city created by the slightly deranged businessman Andrew Ryan. Upon first being introduced to the world through the view lens of a submarine, it's a visual marvel, it really takes your breath away. But the music in the background, coupled by some slightly disturbing imagery on the way down and the rhetoric being put out, gives you this sense of dread or eeriness that, really kind of sets the somber tone for the game. Upon landing at the port, your suspicions are pretty much confirmed. What you perceived as the extremely glossy and marvellous exterior of the city of Rapture is in actuality just a facade, and the interior is a dilapidated, worn down look at what Rapture has become. A panicked man stands nervously outside your submarine as it begins the final stages of docking. The lights in the area that are barely holding together as is begin to flicker, and you can see this sort of silhouette of a woman in the background, but the odd part about it is that she has hooks for hands. The man outside the pod, now just trembling in fear, begins to, beg for his life, but to no avail. The creature lunges its hook into his chest and rips him in half, leaving him dead on the floor. She then turns her attention to your pod, as if almost surprised to see that somebody has even come down to this city, and then immediately hops on top of it, trying to scrape or barrage her way into the pod, but to, again, no success. She then jumps up into the rafters out of sight, and you begin to hear the cackling of a radio next to you. If that intro alone doesn't get you intrigued in the premise of this game, I actually don't know what will. It's funny enough in a sense, because despite this game having been out for 13 years, I still had no idea what the premise of it was. The only real reference material I had to the game going into it was the cover photo, which is of a hunking machine with a drill for a hand, which I later then found out were known as Big Daddies. This game in general though is teeming with life and characters in bucket loads. It's just really easy to get lost in this world, and that's really down to the visual aspect of the game and its fantastic storytelling. Now, the audio design leaves a little bit to be desired, given it is a game from 2007, but I definitely would say that that's a minor problem in comparison to all the benefits this game puts out. To kind of summarize the initial plot without giving too much away, your job is to assist Atlas, a revolutionary leader from the lower classes of Rapture, who in the past had inspired a revolution against Andrew Ryan, which now has led to the deterioration of the entirety of Rapture, and anyone left is either, bunkered away in some hidey hole, or is out on the streets as murderous villains known as splicers. Atlas's main goal initially is to rescue his wife and child, who are stuck in a submarine at the lower areas of Rapture, whilst also trying to fend off from Andrew Ryan's forces. Throughout the game you'll be introduced to a large assortment of characters, and a surprising level of choice and variety is given to the player, considering that the game has a very structured narrative. Speaking of variety of choice, that actually brings me on to my next game, or in this case, next 3 games. I love Mass Effect, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. I think most RPG fans will be able to attest that BioWare's series is without a shadow of a doubt one of, if not the best RPG sci-fi games ever made. I am in a sense kind of cheating by putting 3 games into one slot, but it's just impossible to alienate one of these titles because all 3 of them work so well in tandem. Choices made by the player in the first game can actually have serious ramifications to plot points within the third game, so it seems kind of only fair to judge them as a whole. I'm actually surprised yet again it took me so long to experience this series. I picked up all 3 games back in 2017 when there was a lot of growing hype around the new title Mass Effect Andromeda. The story itself surrounds your character Commander Shepard as you travel throughout the Milky Way, travelling from system to system in an attempt to stop an invading force known as the Reapers, a synthetic life form from destroying all life in the galaxy. I know on the surface it sounds a little cheesy and overplayed, but Mass Effect's main drawing point is its level of choice. The first game especially gives the player a huge level of choice and introduces us to some of the most in-depth, realistic characters we've ever seen in the gaming medium. Despite having played this series on a number of occasions, including the summer of this year, I still find new side quests, pieces of dialogue, or ways of approaching the game that I never even thought of that you don't get with many other titles. To kind of summarise the effect that this game has had on me this year, would be kind of to say that it offered me an escape. When I wasn't able to leave my own house, I was able to leave the solar system through the lens of Commander Shepard. And as cheesy as that sounds, the series in general has given me a large level of enjoyment, emotion, and entertainment. I actually in fact think that there's very few people watching this video that won't at least get something out of Mass Effect. So if there's any game I can really recommend out of this list that you should go and look at, it's this one. Nostalgia can be an amazing thing at the best of times, but to me, when the world is at its worst, when times are tough, I think is when nostalgia really shines. I remember back in 2010, my parents bought me the Xbox 360 for my birthday, and at the time, the main thing everyone wanted was Call of Duty. Black Ops had just released, and it was obviously big hype around that. But my parents took one look at the PEGI rating and just outright said no. They did, however, get me something arguably better. It's always been difficult for me to put into words my love for the Halo franchise. Whilst games like Bioshock and Mass Effect I've come to grow and love throughout time with video games, Halo has always been a constant factor of my experience through the medium. I remember before I even got Halo, or before I even got an Xbox, going over to my friend's house for the release of Halo Reach. We played countless hours of anything and everything that game had to offer, and I was always just enthralled by not only the gameplay and the fun it brought, but also the universe in general. I remember being blown away by the sheer stature and strength of the Master Chief, and the sort of righteousness and religiousness of the Arbiter. I suppose then, when thinking back on it, it's no surprise that when lockdown hit and I was looking for something to cheer me up, the first thing I went to was the Halo Master Chief Collection. Every game within that series, from CE or Reach to Halo 4 or Halo 3 ODST, provides me with some memory of my childhood. They're also pretty fun as well. Most people remember Halo for its bombastic storytelling or its fantastic soundtrack. But what the majority of people come back for is the community it has. Custom games have been a factor of Halo since Halo 3, and they're still being played to this day. I remember throughout the year on countless occasions being up till all hours in the morning, playing with friends, even meeting some new people and playing Halo with them. You could sit in the one lobby and play the same game mode over and over again, but it just wouldn't get boring. I will admit probably a lot of my choice for this is down to nostalgia, but I would like to imagine that this game is as enjoyable as it is for its gameplay. And I think the large player base and community can attest to that. I don't think most people watching this video who haven't played games before will get as much out of Halo as they do out of, say, Bioshock or Mass Effect. But this game does hold a special place in my heart, and it's been with me for over a decade at this stage and has gotten me through some of probably the toughest times in my life. Now, something that's kind of an outlier out of the games I've already mentioned is the title I'm about to mention next. It's an award-winning indie title from 2012, and in comparison to the previous titles mentioned, it's about as action-packed as a conversation between two Trappist monks. Journey, simply put, is a 3D puzzle platformer that surrounds your character getting from the sandy dunes of the bottom of a mountain all the way up to the top of it. On your journey, you'll come across various obstacles and puzzles that need to be resolved, whilst your character also experiences several visions that enhance the story and the background as you play. Journey is a wordless story that none of the characters speak in, that is, and it tells most of its dialogue through its breathtaking visuals. It first released in 2012 on the PlayStation 3, but was ported over to the PlayStation 4 in 2015, and for me personally, that's the best way to experience this title. Again, I know I mentioned spoilers at the beginning, but this title especially is something that should just be experienced firsthand without any spoilers. It's also the only game on this list that contains a feature that I haven't seen implemented in any other game before. If you're connected to the internet while playing this game, you may notice on occasion an identical character accompanying you on your journey. I first initially assumed that this was just an NPC that the game had conjured up to accompany as I went up the mountain, but surprisingly enough I found out after the game had finished that these were real life players who had just hopped into my game at one point or another to experience part of the journey along with me. I suppose in a sense without trying to get too philosophical on the title, and I doubt this was the intention of the creators, but this sort of drop-in, drop-out system as you're going through a journey can almost be likened to a metaphor of going through life, dealing with loss as people leave your journey and new people come along. That's kind of a bit soppy for the video I'm kind of going for here, but that's kind of what I got out of it, and I thought it was a pretty interesting thing, and it brought me a lot of comfort considering the year that we're in. It was a much welcome break from the loud, bombastic games I'm used to, and it was just a nice way to relax at the end of a day. Speaking of relaxation, Doom Eternal is very much the opposite of Journey. It's loud, violent, and constantly in your face. Given that Doom is the holy grail of the shooter genre, it would have been a criminal offence had I not at least experienced it once in my life. I first experienced Doom when picking up the 2016 reboot in 2017, and I was just immediately hooked. You take on the role of the Doom Slayer, a sort of demigod-esque human with increased movement and speed as you take on the forces of hell to prevent a demonic invasion. It's one of the first games that I actually went in to purchase based on solely the soundtrack. I knew very little about the gameplay or the story that was going to be told in this game, but the award-winning score by Mick Gordon was enough for me to at least purchase the title. The sequel, Doom Eternal, came out on the 20th of March this year, which funnily enough coincided with the release of the new Animal Crossing game, which led to some funny but wholesome memes between both communities. Eternal channels very much what made 90s shooters so good. Non-stop, fast-paced, high-octane action in meticulously crafted combat arenas. The game visually is actually gorgeous. You'll encounter a wide variety of locations as well as you travel from destination to destination taking on the forces of hell. There's actually a surprising level of detail put into this game's story as well if you're interested in that, but as the co-founder of id Software and the former lead programmer on the original Doom game, John Carmack, said, "Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not important." And while I don't fully agree with that statement, in Doom's case, it's true. So those are the 5 games that I think got me through 2020. Obviously there's a lot of games that didn't make it onto this list, but that's not to say that I think they're bad games necessarily, quite the opposite in fact. The games mentioned kind of just are more so there because they impacted my life at one stage during the year. Whether it was to escape to the sand dunes of Journey, to escape the stress of college assignments, or whether it was to escape to the stars in the Milky Way when I wasn't even allowed to leave my house. These specific games are the games I'll most remember from this year, and they're certainly games I'll be coming back to in the future. Let me know if there's any particular games that got you through 2020 in the comments below. You can also interact with us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And if you've lasted this long into the video, I'd really appreciate if you could consider giving this video a like and the channel a subscribe, as we're aiming to get to 100 subscribers by the end of February.